Hello everyone, it's me Anita, and I wanted to do a video today on grief, and especially grief around the transgender process and being transgender. This is an area that I've not heard a lot of other people address, and it's turning out to be a surprisingly large part, I think, of the acceptance process of really coming to grips with who I am as a person, accepting myself as a person, and really accepting my past as it is, not as something I would have liked it to have been, and and it's not really clear. I mean, I think it's one of these things that most people would not sort of think about. Grief being a big part of this process. Certainly, there's the possibility of a loss of relationship with important people in one's life. That is certainly a risk that anyone who is transgender and anyone who has decided that they're going to transition has to accept. There are going to be some people who are going to object, who just can't go along, who can't be open, cannot be accepting, because of the transphobia in our society. Part of which we'll see in terms of internalized transphobia, the things that we have taken internally and turned against ourselves. Other people are still struggling with those same feelings as well. And for some of them, they're not feelings they want to or feel capable of actually dealing with. And so they reject us. And certainly the idea of feeling grief for that loss, I think, is one of the parameters that is fairly understood in the transgender process. Although, again, I've not heard it addressed a whole lot. I think people handle that loss in a lot of different ways. There's good ways of handling it. There's bad ways of handling it. And maybe being open about the grieving process. And I may make another video about the grieving process and what I've learned. I'm working with a book by Elizabeth Kubler-ross, and I don't remember the other author's name at this point. But I'll mention it in the description below so that it's attributed correctly. On grief and grieving. And at some point in time, as I work through that book, maybe I'll make another video on grieving and the grieving process for being transgender. But I want to talk about just the experience of grief itself as part of my transgender journey. And this is the first thing that sort of comes into mind, and it's one of the first things that I think that I ran into, is in terms of looking at the loss of relationship. And I've not lost that many, but there have been some people who have just not been able to accept who I am. And but part of that is the sense of, well, if I hadn't chosen to come out, if I hadn't chosen to express myself as who I am, if I hadn't chosen somehow to go down this path, everything could have stayed the same, and those losses wouldn't have happened. And I want to unpack that just a little bit. It's not really part of the grief that I want to talk about, but it's a component of it, I think, in the sense that being transgender is not a choice. We sort of say that, but I don't think we really take it in terms of what that means. I talked before about having Crohn's disease when I was younger and saying that I didn't think God had given me Crohn's disease, just like I didn't think God had given me or made me transgender. It's just what has happened. It is what I've been given to give a gift back to God from. It comes out of the processes that God, the Creator, has created within our world. But it's not specific to, oh, something can happen. It happened to me. There wasn't anything like a master plan where, Article 16-47.36.2.A.Z.14 said, this person's going to get Crohn's disease and be transgender. But it's not a choice. And once you really accept that it's not a choice, then that whole issue of feeling some guilt or feeling um, some responsibility for the loss, they made their choice about not coming along, not accepting me as I truly am. As it became clear to me who I was, as I struggled to accept myself, they were unable to reciprocate and be supportive and work as well at accepting me as who I am. And that is their decision. I'm not responsible for that. So it's not something that I have to say, well, I can't grieve that because somehow it was something I forced, no more than I uh, uh, have to give up grieving the loss of body parts due to the Crohn's disease. I don't have to. I can still grieve that. That's something that's there, and so one of the things that really knowing that this is not a choice does is it helps us to be open up to being able to grieve the losses that we encounter in the relationships as we come out. The second area, though, that really I think is not dealt with this much, although my therapist, frankly, warned me very early on that I was going to have to go through a period of grieving the male shell, grieving the loss of the male shell. And this is a little bit of like saying that to a abused child that they're going to have to go through a process of grieving the loss of their abuser. It doesn't make a lot of sense on the face of it. And I've gone through periods where I've kind of understood maybe what she was getting at. But I think I understand more. I mean, part of it is giving up the privilege. And I've talked about that a little bit in some of the other videos. I'm no longer a white male. I'm no longer at the top of sort of the privilege spectrum, if you will. I'm a transgender person, so I'm real close to the bottom of it now. And so there is that sense of, oh, well, there are a lot of things I took for granted, and I can't take them for granted anymore. Those are losses, and they can be grieved. But I think there's more to grieving the male shell than just loss of privilege. For one thing, the male shell gives you a sense of normalcy or normalcy. It allows you to fit in. It allows you to be seen as not who you are, but as who society thinks you should be. And it's connected in some ways with loss of privilege, but in many ways, it's a loss of security. It's a loss of certainty in how other people are going to respond, or at least a closer sense of certainty about how other people are going to respond, and that's not to be underestimated. After more than a year now of being in transition, there are times when I wish I could just go back to some sort of normal state. It feels to me like everything's changing, even though very little has. But at the same time, it would be nice if I could focus on my life in general as opposed to a lot of transitional related issues. And so I have to grieve that. The harder thing to come to grips with, though, is grieving what didn't happen. I started thinking recently of the experiences that I missed because I was not the gender I identified with physiologically from an early age. And so, for example, the relationship with my mother. I never got to go shopping with her. She had been dead for 2 years by the time I realized I was even transgender. The same with my father. He'd been dead for about 6 years or 5 years by the time I realized I was transgender. I never got to be his daughter. I don't know how he would have accepted it. I don't really know how my mother would have accepted me as her daughter. But I never got a chance to find out. And I never got a chance to be expressive or even to grieve her death as her daughter rather than as her son. And there's a difference in the way, at least for me, there seems to be a difference in the way a man grieves and a woman grieves. Because I think a woman grieves more deeply, more emotionally, more openly emotional. As a male, I tended to be very much a feeling of being steady for everyone else, of taking care of things, of being very task focused, of being very process focused. As a woman, I try at least, and I think I'm successful at being much more aware of the emotional content and much more aware of my own emotions and the emotions of other people, and trying to make myself available to other people for the expression of their emotions. So, again, this is something that I'm starting to realize I have to go through. I have to go back and recall the times that I felt that I could actually express who I really was to my mom. And there were some. There were periods of time that weren't gender specific, that I could be to her who I actually am as a person to her. But I have to go back and revisit those, to cherish those in a different way now, and to call her to mind and to actually grieve her death in a different way. But at the same time, it goes beyond that. It goes to the relationships I had when I was in school. I never had girlfriends in the sense of the way my sister would have girlfriends. With all the little intrigues, with all the going back and forth, I missed all of that. Boys don't do that in general. And so I never felt comfortable in social relationships as a boy, but I never got to feel comfortable as in social relationships as a girl either. And so there's all this that's missing, that's never going to come back. It's not going to be there. Things like motherhood. I'll never be a mother. I'm a father, and I'm enormously thankful for that. But at the same time, you never had the opportunity. And actually, as a trans woman, I never would have back in those days. And so, those are all things that might have happened that are losses to me. There's things that being transgender just didn't allow to happen. And I have to allow myself to grieve those in order to accept my situation as it is now. And it's not just a matter of buck up and you can't make any differences. There is a real emotional loss that's there. There is a sense of having been robbed, having been imprisoned in some ways, and to grieve that loss of expression, that loss of freedom, is something that has to happen. And to find a healthy way, a healing way to do that grieving, to allow the pain, to allow the sorrow, to allow the sadness to be expressed. And once it's expressed, once it comes out, to be able to turn loose of that, to not live my life with that driving it, is an important step to take as part of the whole acceptance process. And so I wanted to just sort of talk about that aspect. Again, I hadn't heard a lot of people talk about the sense of having to go back into a feeling of grief, of the losses that actually occurred, but the losses of opportunities that could have never occurred, um, so that they can be turned loose of, so that they don't have emotional power, so that they're not there bothering us for the rest of our lives, but we can say goodbye to them. We can turn them loose. We don't have to ever be happy that we missed out, that those losses happen, or that we missed those opportunities. But we don't have to live with regrets either. So I wanted to just make that video and talk about that. It's pertinent. It's where I am right at the moment. And again, the beautiful picture of me will show up somewhere, I think, over here. The links to the other videos in this series will appear probably over there. Please subscribe if you have not. I'm not posting on a regular schedule like a lot of other people do. It's sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. It really depends on a lot of other things. So if there's a little bell, and if you click on that, then you'll get notifications when something gets posted, so that you'll know that I actually posted something new. But I do hope this is helpful, both for those who are going through transition and may not have encountered this idea that you actually have to go back through a grieving process. And again, when you're ready to do it, it'll be apparent to you. Or for people who are not transitioning and trying to understand what it's like to be a transgender person and to come to grips with who one really is, especially at a later age in life. I hope that this has given some insight. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate those who watch these videos. Please leave comments if you have any. And we'll talk to you soon, I hope. Bye.